2. Memories are made of. She awoke in the darkness, worried. About what? She lay still, feeling the bedsheets rise and fall as she breathed. Nothing came to mind, nothing save that she was worried. All right, she decided. Start from what I know. I'm in bed, and it's night. Then she became really worried. She couldn't think of anything else to add to those facts. Fighting back the panic that was threatening to erupt inside her, she sat up quickly. The lights came on gradually, as though someone or something had taken note of her movement. When her eyes adjusted to the light, she looked around, hoping for some clues. She was in a large bed. The frame was of polished brass. Beside the bed, a small cabinet supported a Tiffany-style lamp and a glass of what looked like water. Carefully, she sipped. It was water. Score 1 to her. Replacing the glass, she continued to scan the room. A chair, a mirror on a stand, a small dresser, and 2 doors in the wall. Then a small table and a ghetto blaster perched on the table, a tape in the deck, and ready to go. Momentarily she felt relieved. Her mind was working. It could recognise and label everything in the room. So why didn't she know where the room was? A house? Weren't rooms usually in houses? Or maybe a hotel, a boarding house by the sea maybe. She looked at the walls. No pictures at all. And funny kind of walls, come to think of it. There was a regular pattern of inlaid circles, each cut about 6 inches into the wall itself. Did they make houses with walls like that? She didn't think so. There was something vaguely fluttering in the back of her mind that told her walls were usually covered in wallpaper and pictures of cottages or people walking by the sea. Funny sort of room. Oh, well, she was here now. Start from that. A room in a house. Or maybe a hotel. She listened very carefully. No sound of people in the hallway, nor was there a smell of salt in the air or anything that could help her to decide. She could hear a sort of low, throbbing, humming sound right at the threshold of her hearing. Machinery of some kind, obviously. The air was crisp and fresh, with no smell of any kind at all that she could make out. Where else might she be if not in a building? A boat, maybe, or an aeroplane. No, there would be a sense of motion, and the bed was as steady as a rock. She had learnt as much as she could in the bed. The only way to find out more was to get up. Tossing back the covers, she swung her feet to the floor. They hit something and she glanced down. A pile of clothing. It didn't look familiar, but she guessed that it must be hers since there wasn't anyone else to claim it. Of course, she was stark naked, so it made sense that they'd be her clothes, only did she really like this kind of stuff? She bent down and picked up a garment. Her fuzzy memory finally identified it as a T-shirt, worn over the top half of the body. She studied it carefully. It was a dirty pinkish colour. Did she really dress like this? She assumed she did, but it rang no bells with her. Maybe there was something else to wear instead. There was a thought that came to her. Clean clothes. Right, these must be the clothes she'd worn yesterday, whenever that was. Today she could choose some clean clothes. Eyeing the T-shirt again, she decided she'd try to pick something with a bit more class. But where did she keep clean clothes? The dresser was the first thing that came to mind. In the drawers, that's where people usually keep clean clothes. She started towards it, and then stopped as she passed the mirror and caught sight of herself. Was that what she looked like? Medium height, a bit gawky maybe. Not exactly elegant anyway. Dark hair, right now in something of a mess from being slept on all night. A good swift brushing would sort that out. Nice enough face, she guessed, friendly and young and interested, though she couldn't recall any other faces at the moment to compare to hers. Body, well, it looked kind of useful. Muscular, but still obviously feminine. Well, at least she could remember how to tell the difference. She smiled, then frowned. She wished she knew more about who she was. She wished she knew anything about who she was. Moving closer to the mirror, she examined her reflection carefully. She saw herself reflected in her large, dark eyes. Who did that face belong to? People had names, didn't they? Surely she had one then. And didn't people normally wake up knowing things like their own names? What had happened to her? Well, maybe she'd find out when she found out who she was. She shook her head at the mirror, and the reflected person that she didn't recognise shook hers back. "Hello," she said softly to the mirror. Silently it spoke with her. This was daft. A horrible thought snaked into her mind and wouldn't go away. Maybe she was mad, crazy. Maybe she had been locked away in an asylum or something. What if she didn't remember anything because there was nothing to remember? If she was crazy, she might wake up like this every morning, having forgotten all about her life. She vaguely felt she'd heard something about cases like that. People who had short-term memories but no long-term ones. Was that the sort of person she was? She didn't think so. She could recall all kinds of stuff. It was just that none of it was in any way personal. She stared into the eyes of the image in the mirror. They didn't look like a mad person's eyes. Clear, bright and intelligent. That's how they looked. So why was she in such a fog? Dragging her eyes away from the mirror, she walked resolutely to the dresser. She pulled open the top two drawers and saw that her earlier guess was right. They were crammed with clothes. Well, that was a start, anyway. Check them out. Now, what did she normally wear? Again, she drew a blank. Abandon that line of thought, then. Try identifying the clothing instead. A piece of cloth with 3 holes in it. 1 large, 2 small. Knickers, she thought triumphantly. That's what they were. And they were worn on the lower half of the body. She was getting somewhere. But she knew that they weren't worn alone. Other clothing went with them. Jeans, maybe a shirt. Right! But which went on top and which went underneath? Right, knickers first, the other stuff over it. She was getting the hang of this. Slowly, hesitantly, she managed to get dressed. It took her a while to sort out the bra, but finally it was fastened and fairly comfy. Then jeans. In the cupboard. She went to the 2 doors. By chance, the first she tried was the right one. Inside was a smaller room with a selection of clothes. After a moment or two, she found a battered pair of Levi's that seemed to be right. Buttoning them up, she went back to the main room and picked out one of the clean t-shirts. She struggled into it. Was that all? She looked around the room again. On the back of the chair was a jacket of some sort. It looked well used, with a couple of burn marks and several places where the fabric had been gashed and then repaired, and tons of badges on it. None of them made any sense at all to her, but what did right now? With a shrug, she pulled it on, then examined her reflection again. God, what a mess! Did she normally dress like this? No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't remember a thing about herself. It was odd. All the general information was there, and she could name anything she saw that made sense, but nothing at all that related to herself. She spotted a hairbrush on the dresser and knew what it was for, but she didn't know if she normally used it, or how she usually wore her shoulder-length hair. Weird. She could remember things about human beings, but nothing at all about herself. No matter how hard she concentrated, she didn't even know her name, or where she was, or how she had got here. Furiously, she brushed out the kinks and knots in her hair, as though with each stroke of the brush she might knock something back into her head. She brushed until she had tears in her eyes, but still nothing at all in her memory. What had happened to her? Well, maybe when she knew who she was, she'd know what had happened. But how could she discover who she was? When in doubt, look about. The other door had to lead somewhere, didn't it? Unless she was a prisoner. She felt like screaming in frustration. She didn't think she was a prisoner, but what did that prove? She didn't have any idea who she was. Still, hanging about here wouldn't help. The only possible route to self-discovery led through that door. If it was locked, then at least she'd know one thing: she was a prisoner. It opened readily enough at her touch into a corridor. The walls all had those indented circle patterns in them. It seemed to be the style throughout wherever she was, rather than just in her room. Didn't mean anything, but at least it was a fact. File it away for future reference. Now, which way? The corridor led to both the left and right. Toss a coin? Guess? Try a bit of logical thinking? The background humming sound seemed a little louder out here. It also seemed to be slightly stronger in her left ear. Okay, assume that there's someone about. That hum meant machinery, and machinery meant people. Or there was a ticking doubt in the back of her mind that refused to come out and let her look at it. People, that was the key word. Maybe whoever or whatever was here with her, assuming it was anyone else at all, wasn't a person, was something else. Once again, she really didn't know. It was so frustrating. "Oi!" she yelled at the top of her voice. "Anyone home?" After a moment or two, it was quite clear that no one was going to answer. Maybe no one was home, or maybe whoever was home simply couldn't hear her, or simply couldn't reply for one reason or another. Was there danger waiting ahead? Maybe it had been stupid to shout aloud and announce her presence. How could she tell? Thrusting her doubts and questions to the back of her mind, she set off grimly down the corridor. Around the corner, it split into two. Following the noise of the humming, she continued on her way, resisting all urges to examine the closed doors she was passing. One of them might contain information about herself, but it would be a complete waste of time even to start looking. If there was someone about, it would make the whole task a lot faster. Wherever she was, it was a large place. She seemed to be walking for a long time without anything looking appreciably different. Finally, though, the corridor ended in a pair of large doors. The humming was a constant background sound now, and the source probably lay behind the door. Steeling herself, gathering her courage, she threw the doors open. It was a single large room, about 30 feet or so across and almost 15 feet high. In the centre of the room was a hexagonal unit that looked like a large technological mushroom, and in the centre of the unit was a glass cylinder that was rhythmically rising and falling, pulsing with light as it did so. On the mushroom were several panels filled with levers, lights, dials and other equipment. Around the room were scattered various untidy pieces of furniture, a hat stand by another larger set of doors, a wooden high-backed chair, a small chest and a mirror. And finally, another person. She stared in amazement at the figure. He was seated on the floor in a lotus position, legs crossed, hands together, fingertip to fingertip, his chin resting on the pinnacle thus formed. His eyes were screwed tightly shut, and he appeared to be fast asleep. If she had thought her taste in clothing was questionable, his definitely looked objectionable. Scruffy shoes that didn't seem to have been polished for at least a decade, baggy trousers, a floppy coat of some unsavoury brown hue, a paisley tie badly knotted, and a sweater adorned with question marks. Thrown over the chair that was close to him was a battered tan hat and a paisley scarf almost as appalling as his tie. An umbrella was hung over the back of the chair. She peered at the man, studying his features. A broad face with plenty of laughter lines. Sort of ageless, really. If only it looked familiar to her. But she couldn't even remember having seen him before. Still, at least he might have a few answers that could help her out. Reaching out a hand, she gripped one of his wrists and shook him. "Oi! Wake up!" When there was no immediate response, she shook him again, harder. He seemed to unfold in a second, rolling backwards out of her grasp and leaping to his feet in a fighting crouch, eyes bright and expression ferocious. Then, seeing her, he visibly relaxed. "Didn't I tell you not to do that?" he snapped crossly. "You could have permanently damaged my psyche, breaking the trance like that." He peered at her, somewhat myopically. "Done something with your hair, haven't you? Don't like it." He turned away from her and bent to study the readings on the central panel. "I don't know what you're talking about," she told him. With his back to her, he said, "Well, you normally wear your hair sort of gathered." "Not about my hair," she snapped. "About anything." That got his attention. He twisted about to stare thoughtfully at her. "Can you explain that?" "I can't explain anything," she told him miserably. "I don't know anything. Who I am, who you are. Do I know you?" Oh dear. He began to nibble nervously at his thumbnail. "No memory at all?" She shook her head. "But you can speak English and get dressed." "I can remember all sorts of generic stuff," she told him. "Just when I try and remember anything at all about myself that I draw a blank." He turned back to the controls again, scuttling about the console. Stopping in front of one set of instruments, he slammed his hand down hard. "Bother. I had a suspicion it would be a mistake. I should have listened to myself, but I never do I?" "How should I know?" she asked crossly. "All I want to know is who I am and what's going on." "It's not so much going on as going out," he told her cryptically. "I've been editing a few of my useless memories, and I seem to have set the field a bit too high. It didn't just erase my brain patterns, but all of yours as well." A lot of that didn't make much sense, but she managed to gather one thing from what he had said. "You mean that you caused me to forget everything?" "I'm afraid so. Yes," he apologised. "Purely by accident, of course." She wasn't sure whether she should be furious at this point. Would a person get angry because their memories had been stolen? It seemed reasonable, and she certainly felt annoyed. "You stupid idiot!" she yelled. "What have you done to me?" He hopped nervously from foot to foot. "Well, hopefully nothing I can't reverse," he answered. "All your memories must still be in the TARDIS's telepathic circuit, so all I have to do is..." He smacked the controls hard with his clenched fist. Abruptly, another person materialised by the panel. This one was tall and imposing. A long burgundy-coloured coat and a long red scarf hung over the thin frame. A burgundy-coloured hat perched atop a mass of curly brown hair. The newcomer's face broke into a hearty, toothy grin. "Hello, Doctor," he said. "Oh no." Her companion started at the intruder almost in despair. "Who's that?" she demanded, startled. "Me,"